Welcome back. First things first, I've been getting a lot of DMs lately asking me, yo, what's this show about? I don't understand. It changes all the time. But look, it's about whatever we want it to be about. It's our show. We like politics, sports, entertainment, whatever. Okay, so it's whatever we want. Straight like that. All right. So in response to Twitter putting this note at the bottom of Trump's tweet saying, get the facts, he says I'm being censored and that social media sites in general are censoring conservatives. This has been a complaint of his for a while. And so he's issued an executive order. So let's talk about what that executive order has to do with. Okay, Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. Okay, what this says is it's basically a protection for websites like social media sites where there's a whole bunch of, it's like a public square. It's like a communication of all kind of people where they, as a site, can't be sued for what Joe Schmo says. Then maybe they, slander somebody, or I guess that would be verbal, but if they write and libel somebody, the site can't be sued. That's what allows kind of free flow of information, freedom of speech. That's what allows for that to happen. Okay, so they have immunity so that there can be that free communication. It's not like a New York Times, right? We're talking about Facebook and Twitter, and it's communication. And it says in 230 that they can set content standards. They can set standards for their platform. Okay, no obscene nudity, perhaps, maybe. Or no speaking about violence. Or maybe no lies, I guess, if they wanted to have a certain standard like that. They're able to under 230, as long as they're doing it in good faith. And so what Trump is arguing and suggesting with the executive order is that if they're not going to practice in good faith, that they be treated as a publisher, which would open them up to all kind of lawsuits and would just completely change some of these platforms. So do you think this type of regulation is needed to stop conservative censorship? Do you think he has a point about that?
I think censorship for the right in particular it's a thing, but I don't think it's as big as the conservative side of things is making it seem. I think that social media should be the Wild West.
Okay.
I love the concept of let anything go. I think there should also be age regulations to everything. I think YouTube does a great job as far as you can list your content as 18 above or 18 under and or everybody. It may have issues with filtering things because I know that, Louder Crowder, right? He had an issue with being demonetized because there were filters automatically, deboosting his content. But that's besides the point. Just let it all go. Let it be free. You can't pick and choose who you want to fact check because it could go both ways.
So what Sal's referring to is, from what I understand, Trump's executive order probably doesn't hold up because he's trying to instruct an independent agency, the FCC, which is in the executive branch, but it's an independent agency, so Trump doesn't have control over it at all. So I don't think it's going to hold up. He's kind of asking them to do something where the FCC would have to interpret the law and almost change the law, perhaps. And that's for Congress to do, not an independent agency. So I don't think it's going to hold up. But what Trump is trying to make these sites choose between is either A, be treated as a publisher, where you got to really watch what everybody is saying and keep it, I guess, really tightly regulated so that you don't get sued, which completely changes it from being a free, open expression zone. Or you got to say, okay, whatever goes, and you can't pick and choose who you're going to censor or what you're going to censor. You kind of just got to let it be the Wild West, right?
Right, but Twitter obviously doesn't want to put themselves as liable for anything, right? Because it doesn't open up a whole can of worms. I mean, have you gone on Twitter and ever get spammed with adult content? I mean, there's nudity, there's all kinds of stuff out there. So if they're going to let that go, but they're going to pick and choose when to fact check Trump, it's obvious that it's like he's being, I don't want to say he's being singled out, right? Because he does say things that need to be fact checked, right? We could all agree there. But to an extent, they are.
Right.
And I think this is a card that Trump might just play to just see what happens. Put the ball in their court. Like, do they want to end up being liable for things, or are they just going to let everything go and maybe back off for a little bit? We're going to have to see.
I think I agree with you. The whole right-wing censorship thing, I think, is overblown. Like, if you look at Trump, he won an election in 2016 using Facebook and maybe even Twitter. I know Facebook they use great. I see all kind of conservatives on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, all of these, Instagram, with millions of followers spreading their word, as much or more than I see the left. So I don't really see it as a problem, but there have been some instances, right, where it has happened, where they've, deplatformed somebody, or even if they haven't, the threat is there, right? They have all this power, and it's hard to watch them, and they could tweak some things, right? So I think the threat is there. My concern is if, people are saying all or nothing to, with Trump's executive order, it would have to be publisher or Wild West. I don't know if I like that, because I don't like them being treated as a publisher and have to be super regulated, because that takes away our freedom of speech. This is now the public square, and we need to be able to say what we want to say, right? Even if it doesn't meet the government's new regulations of what should be said. I think that's a little bit of a scary, slippery slope. On the other hand, I don't know if I'm as comfortable as you maybe with the Wild West, sort of. I mean, it sounds good, but if it's your site, you still ought to be able to have what it is now, which is some good faith, as long as it's being fairly administered, some good faith rules. So it's a very tricky subject. What I think is interesting is it's sort of a different route, maybe a different option for Congress on this whole issue. Because what scares me more than censorship is how on these sites they use algorithms to constantly show us things that we want to agree with, or want to piss us off, or want to scare us, or whatever, right? So you're on Facebook and you're constantly seeing things that support your bias, or you're on Instagram or Twitter, whatever, and you see that fake news or that conspiracy theory video on YouTube that keeps popping up, and it populates and you see it and you click on it. That has damaged, I feel like, our body politic to such a large extent. And that's, I'm kind of afraid, as much of censorship as like just their ability to manipulate and get us riled up. And so it's scary, but I guess I can see some need for a regulation of this public square for that reason more than the censorship. Because, and let me, the point is actually getting at, what I think would be interesting is to somehow create competition, have some new rules, some new regulations to create competition. Like, I would rather, I'm less afraid of a private company like Twitter or Facebook that I can leave if I want. I'm voluntarily associating with it, than the government. If they make a law, like, I can't leave that. If they're regulating speech in this public square online, I can't, like, this is public speech online. I can't really leave that. I can't leave the federal government, right? So if we created some sort of mechanism where there was more competition and I could go to a different site, maybe interoperability, meaning like if I'm on Snapchat, maybe I can access all my friends that are on Facebook, or things of that nature that have been used in, like, I think cell service and stuff. They've done some of that where, if you have AT&T, you can call somebody on Verizon, or you can take your phone and go somewhere else. It's a complicated thing. I'm not super well versed in it, but I think that would be something worth thinking about. And I've seen it online being supported, which is to create competition. Like, is there any reason why Amazon ought to have such a monopoly in their sector? Is there any reason why Google should have so much control over search? Is there any reason why Facebook should have such control with the ownership of Instagram and their platform over social media? Like, my dad was telling me earlier today, like, man, I'm really getting tired of Facebook. You know what I mean? Like, it's a lot of aspects of it I don't like. but you're kind of still there, and you kind of still feel a little bit stuck because it's like modern life now. It's how we talk, it's how we communicate. Can you really leave? Like, you can, but you know, maybe if conservatives had an alternative to Twitter, they could go somewhere that they thought they were being treated more fairly. You know, I think maybe that's a decent approach to regulation, rather than regulating the speech or what can be said and how it can be said, because that's just, you know, that's dangerous, right? That violates to me free speech more than the current status quo, where they might mis-censor something or act out.
I'm with you and I'm not with you.
Yeah.
At some points, you know, like Amazon's Amazon, you know what I mean? It's a successful company for a reason. It's well managed. It's, you know what I mean? Twitter's private, Facebook's private. I mean, they're established because of just success as a company, you know what I mean? And I don't think that anyone should ever step on their toes. But I've always said that if you become such a large platform where everyone is almost, like you said, modernized, forced to be into it, it should be considered a public forum, you know? And I do think this is Trump's angle. Again, he's going to put the ball in Twitter's court, and if they decide to go free with it, and you could say whatever you want, right, and the honor system, then they're going to look like the good guy, because they're going to keep it the way it is. But if they start limiting what people say, then they're going to be like the bad guy. So I think that's his angle. I think he wants them to make the decision. You know, he's going to make this order, whatever.
No, that's true. I just still feel like I don't want 100% either or. I don't want regulated zone or Wild Wild West. You know, I like having one that's pretty much open. I mean, Twitter, you can pretty much say whatever. And Trump says a lot of crazy things, and they don't, even with what they're doing, they're not taking it down. They're just putting a note, you know, or something like that. Like, they ought to be able to, if we're talking about ISIS sending around some video, or if we're talking about some, you know, fake news about a virus in the middle of a pandemic, and they want to have a content standard where they say, okay, this violates our policies as a site. I mean, I feel like as a private company, they ought to be able to do that without being a publisher. You know what I'm saying? So I guess that's where I kind of like the idea of creating competition, or maybe people feeling like they can go somewhere else and do the same type of speech without being there. But I mean, it is complicated.
It's very complicated.
And another problem, let's say we have all the standards that are the regulations that we put on Facebook. Well, what happens when a new company has an idea and they want to start a new social media platform that's innovative in some way, but they can't possibly meet the regulations? Like, they can't afford to watch and supervise over this sprawling site maybe that they have. It puts Facebook at an even more of an advantage with the, you know, sort of semi-monopoly that they have. You know, so that's what companies oftentimes try to do with regulations that sound good, but what do? They stop new organic companies from popping up and being able to challenge them because of all the regulations that stifle the new guy that can't afford and doesn't have the economies of scale to deal with that. You know, so I worry about that too.
I think a lot of this stems with the idea of conservative thought being just not progressive with the times. You know, like, could you imagine if Twitter was ultra conservative and every time someone tweeted about pro-choice, they said, oh, well, actually, you could have this post, but realistically, life starts here. You know what I mean? Like, that would piss people off. So it just appears that only things that are conservative, not with the status quo, are being, I mean, we have a professor being banned from Twitter because she said that a man can only be a man. You know what I mean? Like, so it's those instances where it only appears to be on the conservative side. You don't see anyone that's on the left being banned or demonetized just because Twitter wants to make face and not offend anybody. You know what I mean? But they're okay with offending someone that's conservative and shutting down what they think, but not the other side. Again, I'm generalizing.
No. I agree with that. And that's what makes it hard. Like, this is the public forum, right? Like, you can't really not be on Twitter if you're a writer, or if you want to start a video like we're doing right here, where are you going to go but YouTube, right? That's where the people are. And so you're at a big disadvantage if you're, if you were one of these conservatives that gets docked, like, you're at a huge disadvantage. You can't just simply go to some other site. That's sort of my argument, is that maybe there ought to be another site. Create competition in that way, like everything else, where we as people and consumers choose, and that's what dictates, what companies do rather than the government regulation. Like, I don't think, honestly, that Twitter wants to get rid of all conservatives. I mean, they still are half the country. Do they really want to lose all those people? Does Facebook really want to lose all conservatives? That doesn't make sense, but I don't know. I mean, what's so funny?
I'm just thinking of what you're saying, and to me, I see like a centralized Wild West Twitter, then a left, everyone sucking their dick and prayer and like running through prairies, and then the right where there's just Bible verses, and like it's just they're not gonna.
Right.
It just doesn't make sense. Like, I get the theory, but to me, in
I know
practice,
what you're saying.
it's
I
like
thought through that too.
Someone on the right's gonna post something about, I don't know, anything, just to trigger the other side, and vice versa. You know what I mean? Like, no one's gonna post, Black Lives Matter. Yes, they want other people to follow and join, right? But they also want the opposing side. Not that conservatives don't believe in Black Lives Matter, but pro-life, pro-choice is just the easiest thing. Most of the time you're posting stuff is to try to convince the other side, to get engagement, to, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's hard, and unless you're like just...
Yeah, and then you're siloing off again and
tooting
kind of
your own
having
horn.
the Fox and CNN thing. We already have that problem.
Right, and I think it's going to further polarize what's going on. It's so tough. I think that a simple regulation that should be put in the future is, if you have X, Y, and Z followers, so many people in the United States are part of Twitter or the world, you got to have some sort of freedom of speech laws put in there. No matter what you say, can't be talked about. Like, don't put a message on my post.
Yeah.
Don't do it. Don't touch it.
Right, because that was crappy what they did.
Right.
I mean, I have to say, I'm not a huge fan of Trump. Not a fan of his message on mail-in ballots. But it's not really something that you can say as a get the facts, right? It's not like he's saying the sky is orange and they want to make sure people know that. That's not true. Like, he has an opinion I disagree with. I think he's fear-mongering about it, and I think he has an interest in not having widespread mail-in ballots being sent out. But it's still his opinion. He still gets to say that without you trying to claim it's false. Although it is kind of super unlikely what he's saying. You can't say that it would not possibly happen, that there could be some fraud that would take place in some capacity somewhere in America with mail-in ballots.
Right. I mean, if I were to
Although
copy
you could say
and
the
paste,
same thing about the way we currently vote,
Right.
you could say there could be fraud.
Right, but if I were to copy and paste what he tweeted and I tweeted it, would I have that message?
Doesn't matter as much. Do you have millions of followers? I mean, I know what you're saying.
Right.
I know what you're saying. But so you wouldn't want Twitter to do the publisher route, right?
No.
You would want them to say, okay, we're just not gonna regulate it all. But like, you would. Are there any things you would have for, like, is there anything they get immunity? I mean, not immunity. Is there anything they get to, in good faith, have standards for? It's just not like any political speech, basically, you're saying? Like,
I don't want you to dox somebody.
obscene stuff that has,
Right,
like on television, you can't have obscenity.
No, of
they could
course.
still be able to, like, if they wanted to, because Twitter allows porn. But if they wanted to not have porn, they could still do that. Or they wanted to not have violence. But they would just have to fairly do it. But that brings us to where we are kind of now, where they are oppose violent things, but then they unfairly do it. It's like we need our own, like, court set up, like a FISA court. We need our own, like, speech social media court or something. But
here's the thing: you don't have to follow Trump. You don't have to follow him on Twitter. You can turn your news notifications off. So it's not like that's forcing you to see that content.
I guess the issue is the spread of misinformation is not really about choice. It's about people being misled, you know?
Yeah, but who's the judge there? Like, who's the Twitter courts? Who's sitting there and saying what's right or wrong for Twitter? How can we gauge their political background? How can we gauge where they are on the political spectrum? So
either one of two things: the government has to step in, or
just let it
you
go.
gotta have competition.
Just let it go. I mean, when I say Wild West, I'm just trying to be facetious, but at the same time,
I mean, you're essentially not. I mean, you're essentially saying, unless it's like, I don't know, child pornography. I mean, you're essentially saying, let it all go. You don't have to follow it.
Right,
and that's true. That's a good point.
You could also do what Instagram does and sensitive content. I'm all for that. You just press the button. If they deem content to be sensitive, it shows it. You just click it, and then you can see the content. If you don't want to click it, don't click it.
But for sensitive content, not political.
Right.
You don't want one that says...
Yeah, but that's the beauty of it. Politics needs to be an open forum. He's not saying anything so out there bizarre. You know what I mean? In this particular case, it's not like so out of left field, like ridiculous. It's so.
Well, it wouldn't matter to you if it was. You're saying, even if it is ridiculous.
Do your homework, look it up, Google it, figure it out. Don't just don't be a goldfish. Don't just take what someone says, whether it's the president of the United States.
I guess you're right. We can't protect ourselves from ourselves.
Right.
Right.
So
like if we're that dumb, then we just deserve to fall into oblivion.
The Onion's putting out false information all the time, but no one says it's right. But I'm just saying, so if I create a parody account and start saying random stuff, but don't claim it to be a parody, like, are they going to start?
You may have convinced me. I may be on board with Trump's executive order. All right, guys, don't be cheap, bitches. Like, share, subscribe to that hoe.